Colleagues, can I have screens on, please?
And you have quorum, Your Worship.
Thank you. Also, colleagues, I'm told the Councillor Helmer will be several minutes, but will be coming into the meeting as he is able to advise you formally, as we like to do when we're aware that any of our colleagues are not in a meeting at a given time. So thank you very much. And colleagues as well, thank you very much for making the accommodation with regard to the issues in terms of being in council as required in council chambers. Certainly, I think your response is in the interests of staff and ourselves, and I'm certainly grateful for your efforts in doing that. So with that, I'll call the meeting to order. The meeting is held as a virtual meeting during the COVID-19 emergency. We would invite viewers to check the city website for current details of COVID-19 service impacts. Meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Colleagues, I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Salee.
Yes, I'd like to declare a pecuniary interest on the Community Protective Services report, the 2.2, the agreement with the London, Middlesex and local immigration, refugees and citizenship Canada as I'm employed by the Canadian Border Services Agency.
So noted, thank you. Councillor, did you get that, clerk? Thank you very much. Councillor Hamu.
I have a conflict of interest with 978 Gainsborough Road. As I worked on the project, that's number 19 on 8.2, number 19. And I also have a conflict as I am related to York Developments, the people at York Developments. Can
you be specific on the items that would be helpful to us?
It would be item 6.1. Number 1's York Developments.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to number 8.5, the first report of the Strategic Priorities and Policies Committee in the municipal budget, I declare conflict with any of the funding associated with the London Public Library system, as my spouse is an employee of the London Public Library.
Thank you again. For the benefit of all, could you just specify that item, please? I know you have by name, but by number?
I was trying so hard to be as specific as I could, but Your Worship, I can't find it in a fast enough time for you, but I will pass it forward at the opportunity when I can. I believe it's within the operating budget, which would be item 10 or 4.8.
4.8, yeah. And there may be a specific item within that you'll deal with at that time as per the conflict, or the whole item as you see appropriate. Any other items where colleagues wish to disclose? Councillor Van Meerbergen, please.
Thank you, Mayor. It's with regard to the budget, and I believe it's from 4.1 from the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee meeting that we had on the budget, with case number P5, which in regard to childcare. The conflict is my wife runs her own and operates her own childcare. So I just like that declared.
Thank you. And colleagues, four have indicated a pecuniary interest. And so what I would ask you to do as well is to pay specific mind as we deal with those items, so that we'll ask you to be very specific to your potential for a conflict. So we appreciate your declarations. Thank you very much.
Mayor Holder.
Hello.
There's one for me too.
And Councillor Helmer is in the room. Go ahead, please, sir.
Thank you. I just want to declare a pecuniary interest on the golf operating and capital budgets as I did at FPPC.
So noted. And again, thank you very much. We'll ask colleagues that as these items come forward to reconfirm the conflict so that we can deal with it appropriately. And I appreciate that very much. Any other disclosures? Well, colleagues, we have three recognitions tonight, and I first like to count on Councillor Pelosa for the first two, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Two items I just want to bring for public recognition. The first being the Dearness Home. It's the city's municipally run long-term care home. Just a thank you to our board. I chair it, but to thank you to Councillor Hopkins, Cassidy, Helmer, and Lehman who join me on that board, and to the staff who support it, as the home's been doing great work throughout the pandemic and stays behind the scenes, but so much is being done. Some volunteers have recently been able to start returning to the home and operating the tuck shop, which residents enjoy. And for the public, there's been over 480 residents trained who are now essential caregivers who can enter the home and care for their loved ones, which is absolutely crucial. And for those in the public wondering about the home and looking for information, the home is in the process of developing a virtual tour video for potential residents can see what the home would be like to live there. So thank you so much to all in the community who make that home such a special place, especially over the holidays and every day. My second recognition this evening is recognizing Brian Meehan, who's the Executive Director of Museum London. It was a virtual conference, but he was recently recognized with the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Galleries of Ontario, as he served at Museum London as Executive Director for 22 years, developing and devoting so much of his life to the museum, to the arts in this community, and to the community at large. So a special congratulations to Mr. Meehan. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And colleagues, it's my honor to pay tribute to a great Londoner and a great Canadian, James William Scotty Martin. In the early hours of Saturday, December 18th, London lost one of its most decorated soldiers. James William Martin, known to most of us as Scotty, was in his 96th year. Scotty Martin, Honorary Lieutenant Colonel, 31 Service Battalion, had a long and distinguished military career, which he began at the age of 15. His 40 years of service took him around the world, from Korea to Newfoundland, to Kingston, Jamaica, to Vietnam, and back home to London, Ontario. Numerous awards as one of the most decorated soldiers in London. The Meritorious Service Medal, the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal and Clasp, the 1939-1945 War Medal, the Canadian Korea Medal, the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal for Korea, the Peacekeeping Medal, UN Korea, the International Commission of Control and Supervision, ICCS Vietnam, the Queen's Silver Jubilee Medal, and finally the Canadian Forces Decoration CD with 2 bars. Friends, Scotty dedicated his career to the country that he loved, and in his retirement, he continued to give back to our community in so many significant ways. Locally, Scotty's contributions included service with the Royal Canadian Legion, the Garrison Community Council, the Warriors Day Parade, and London Celebrates Canada. He was a great Canadian, a great Londoner. We will miss him, and we will remember him. Colleagues, I'm not aware of any confidential matters to be considered in public. And with regard to item 4, which is council in closed session, I'm going to look for a motion to change the order to move item 4, council in closed session, and the 10th report of council in closed session to after stage 13 bylaws. I'll look for a mover, please. Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Thanks very much. We'll call the vote.
I'm in favor.
Thank you.
Councillor Van Meerbergen, Councillor Turner,
I'm in favor.
Thank you.
closing the vote, motion carries 14-0.
Thanks very much. I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting held on December 7th, and I'll put that on the floor. Is there a mover, please? Councillor Fife-Milliter, seconded by Councillor Hamou. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
In favor?
I'm in favor.
Thank you.
Mayor, I'm in favor as well. I'm having trouble keeping my voting thing up.
Thank you.
Councillor Van Holst, closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thanks, colleagues. We have and petitions dealing with the environmental management guidelines, a public notice policy amendment. And for those items, we're looking for a mover and seconder to put those to the appropriate committees as they are noted. Do I have a mover, please? I see Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Thank you very much. Any questions? Then we'll call the vote.
I'm in favor.
Thank you, Councillor Slay.
Councillor Manholz is in favor.
Thank you.
Councillor Fife-Miller is in favor.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Your Worship, I haven't opened the vote yet because Councillor Hillier was trying to get your attention. Thank you.
So it was nice that everybody voted, but we're going to let you do it again in just a moment. Councillor Hillier, did you have something to ask or comment on?
I was just curious in this motion, didn't we have to split it out for Councillor Hamou? Because she needs 6.1 separately.
I did ask colleagues to do their own policing, but you're exactly correct. So I believe on this, by virtue of this communication, which involves communication from York Developments, that likely, Councillor Hamou, you might wish to recuse yourself. So I appreciate that. Let's deal with 6.1. And with that, I'll look to clerks. Thank you very much, Councillor Hillier. We will we'll deal with 6.1 environmental management guidelines and the communication from York Developments in that. Any comments or questions on 6.1? Then I'll look to the clerk to pull the vote up.
The motion regarding 6.1, part 1 is open.
Councillor Helmer is in favor.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer.
Councillor Turner, Councillor Turner. Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0 with 1 recuse.
Thanks very much. Item 6.2, and there are communications there from Mr. Benedict and Ms. Velastro, and a second one from Ms. Velastro. I'll look for a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Van Berbergen and seconded by Councillor Fife Miller. Thank you. Any comments, questions? We'll call the question then. Thanks.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Any motions to which notice has been given? So that takes us to the first report of Civic Works. I'll call on Councillor Pelosi, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is the first report of Civic Works. We have items 1 through 8. I have not been given notice to have anything pulled separate before I comment.
I'll look to see if colleagues have anything that they would like to have dealt with separately on the Civic Works report. Just bear with me a moment, colleagues. I would ask if I could, if 4.1 could be dealt with separately actually not for a separate vote, but I would like to, I'll discuss it at the appropriate time, so I will not have it pulled. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see no other items to be dealt with separately. Over to you, Councillor Pelosi, please.
Perfect. Thank you. All these were unanimous votes at Civic Works. I would like to congratulate Councillor Fife Millar for becoming the Vice Chair of Civic Works, and thank you for being willing to serve. Everything was in-depth conversation, with the highlight being item 4.1, which the mayor will make comment on in a moment. We did receive a staff presentation that was about 6 minutes long, and in the added Civic Works agenda was a slide deck that went in-depth in advance of our conversation about a regional transportation in London in this conceptual framework. So I will leave it there and allow the mayor to speak more on 4.1. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, 4.1 is a conceptual framework for regional transportation in London and transcends just London, beyond London. But what it does is it highlights our city as the regional transportation mobility hub for Southwestern Ontario. You'll note that we had early support from Thames Centre when London had originally positioned itself as the regional transportation and mobility hub. And since that time, EDC Score, which are a number of rural communities from across Southwestern Ontario have endorsed this. And in my capacity as chair of the Southwestern Ontario Transportation Task Force, appointed by the province. I will tell you that we've got very strong supporting remarks from most of the communities tied to the task force, and we'll be getting formal direction there from them. The reason I share that with you is because I think it is important that particularly as we go forward with our regional transportation plan, our intercity works, our discussions around rail and road and air and water, that all of this is become fairly clear that as we go forward, it doesn't happen unless London has a part to play in it. But what this endorsement does too is that it really acknowledges from this community right through to Queen's Park how important the things that we are doing to improve transportation networks throughout our community as it grows, and throughout Southwestern Ontario as it grows. So I'm quite excited about the opportunity to support this and work with mayors and band chiefs from across Southwestern Ontario as we go forward and lay out a plan in February. So I want to thank the committee for supporting this totally, and look forward to your support on this as well. Thank you. Councillor Plaza.
I'm just looking to see if there's any speakers for you, and if not, that was all my comments on all the items that are on the floor.
Any comments on any items on the floor? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Councillor Plaza.
Includes the first report of the Civic Works Committee.
Thanks very much. And now for the first report of the Planning Environment Committee, I'll call on Councillor Hopkins, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have not heard from anyone wanting to pull any items. So with that, I do understand that Councillor Hamou has requested that 19.3.6, which is 978 Gainsborough Road, she would like to recuse herself on that. I would like to bring to her attention and through you to staff, there are a number of other items relating to York, which is number 22, 3.9, which is 50 King Street, the demolition request, and number 25, 4.3, which was a request for council resolution on 1919 and 1929 Oxford Street West, all related to York developments. Not sure I've missed any, but I wanted to bring that to the councillor's attention before moving forward.
I appreciate that, Councillor Hopkins, and I've noted those 3 items. If Councillor Hamou believes there are any others, then she can bring that to our attention. But I'll ask if any colleagues as well wish to deal with anything else separately. Councillor Hamou? I see your hand up.
Sorry, that was to declare as well that number 22. And thank you for the catch on number 25.
So noted. Thanks very much. Any other items, colleagues, you wish to have dealt with separately? I see none, so we'll over to you, Councillor Hopkins, where we'll be dealing with all but items 19, 22, and 25. Over to you, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would like to say and thank the committee for the amount of work that was done at planning. Our agendas are quite long. We had 9 public participation meetings and the election of our vice chair, which is Councillor Lehman. So congratulations, Councillor Lehman. Of course, we received a number of consent items removing holding provisions, so lots of development going on. We endorsed the transit-oriented secondary plan prioritization, as well as receiving October's building report, and a special thank you to staff for all the work that they're doing, getting these permits out. We are reaching unprecedented numbers and really want to thank staff. I also want to thank Britt O'Hagan and her staff for doing the virtual Urban Design Awards for 2022. It was a privilege to be part of that jury and want to thank the volunteers that came out. I always find that being on planning, seeing these applications come in on paper and then going out and seeing them in our communities is always such a fascinating and educational process for me to be part of, and the work that goes into that virtual award ceremony. We do this every 2 years, and of course this year being virtual, and many thanks to staff for all the work that they do. They really truly believe in the importance of urban design as it relates to our city and all the building that's going on. With that, I'd like to present the report. We also just want to bring to the attention of council, we have also adopted the environmental management guidelines. These are guidelines that will be reviewed biannual. We did have a conversation about putting it on the deferral list, but it was not supported, and it's really important that these guidelines be updated. The last update was in 2007, so they were needed to be done, and thanks to staff, 3 years of work that went into updating these guidelines. So with that, I'd like to present the first report of the planning environment.
Thank you, and that's with the 3 exceptions as we've indicated here, which depending we may put as one motion, appreciating that there will be one declaration of interest. So with that, any comments on all but those 3 items? Any colleagues wish to make? Here I am looking around the horseshoe. Nobody's there, but it was interesting to see nobody there. But having said that, colleagues, let's call the question, please.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
I wonder, Councillor Hopkins, if you'd like to put those other 3 items together as one, since it seems to be a declaration of interest.
Yes, I'll put on number 19, 3.6, which is 978 Gainsborough Road, 22, 3.9, 50 King Street, the demolition request, as well as number 25, 4.3, a request for council resolution.
Thanks very much. Comments or questions? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0 with 1 recused.
Councillor Hopkins?
That is
Much. And now for the first report of the Community and Protective Services Committee, calling Councillor Helmer, please. Helmer? It is.
It's no longer me, it's Councillor Cassidy.
I thought it was. We miss you. I guess that was all I can say. Councillor Cassidy, if you would please.
I won't take offense to that, Mr. Mayor, and I will put the entire report on the floor. I have not heard yet if anyone would like to pull an item.
Any items that colleagues wish to have dealt with separately? Councillor Salih?
Yes, if I could just pull the 2.2, the agreement with Immigration Refugees Citizenship Canada as employed by the federal government, CBSA.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions with the exception of 2.2? Back to you, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and my apologies to Councillor Sully for not catching that. So I will put everything on the floor except for 2.2. I just have one comment on 2.4, which is the Reaching Home capital projects. It's a good news story for London. City of London responded on behalf of the London Middlesex Local Immigration Partnership. We were just a select group of LIPs that were invited to apply to an RFQ from Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, and we were successful in getting funding through this program. We're looking at, sorry, I'm talking about the wrong one. 2.4 is the Reaching Home Capital Projects, and again, we have received our allocation, which will flow through the City of London to 3 organizations, the Atlosa Family Services Group, London Cares, and the Unity Project. And the details of those projects are in the agenda and the reports. $2 million in total capital funding, and very happy to receive this allocation and see that these groups get this funding. So with that, I'll put the entire report except for 2.2 on the floor.
Other comments or questions? I guess we didn't miss you that much, Councillor Helmer, so with that, we'll call the question. We did, actually.
Councillor Hamou? Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy?
The one where we responded on behalf of our local immigration partnership. City of London responded to the RFQ through Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, and we were the successful organization to align. So on behalf of the LIMLIP, there will be service delivery improvements, developing models of community-based plans for settlement service delivery and funding. And I'm putting that item on the floor. Also with the comment that Councillor Helmer was chosen by the committee as the vice chair for this next year. So you might see him again.
Well, I feel a lot better knowing that. Thank you very much. And having said that, any comments or questions with the final item here? I guess 2 items, the confirmation of Councillor Helmer as vice. Councillor Hopkins, did you have a comment? I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. If I see none, we'll call the question.
Councillor Morgan? Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0 with 1 recuse.
Cassidy?
That's my report, Your Worship.
Thanks very much. Now for the first report of Corporate Services Committee, I'll call on Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. It was a short agenda at Corporate Services, but I have been asked to pull item 2, that's 1.2, the election of the vice chair. Councillor Fife Miller asked that be pulled so he could speak to it.
Thanks very much. So that puts items 1.1 through 5.1 with exclusion of 1.2 on the floor. Anyone wish to have any other item dealt with separately? If you're talking about 1.2, you're a bit early, Councillor Fife Miller.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Could I ask that item 4.1 be put on the floor too, please?
Thank you. So we're now dealing with items 1, 3, and 5. Anyone else wish to deal with anything separately? Over to you, Councillor Lewis.
Well, then I think we can call the question on the consent agenda, Your Worship, on what's left of it.
With that, we'll call the vote.
Councillor Morgan. Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll put item 2, that's 1.2 from the committee agenda, the election of the vice chair, on the floor.
Anyone wishing to speak to it? Councillor Fife Miller, I think you did. Go ahead, please.
If I could, through you, Your Worship, obviously I was a little bit too much of a keener on this going the first time through, and I've ended up with 2 vice chairs. I am vice chair for Civic Works. I do know that there is another member of the Corporate Services Committee that would be more than happy to take over the vice chair role of this committee. So I guess what I'm asking is my colleagues reject that item, and then we'll put a new name on the floor for vice chair of Corporate Services.
Do you have a seconder for, bear with me, please. Seconder for that, please. Okay, Councillor Lewis, thank you. So this is to withdraw, the motion is to withdraw Councillor Fife Miller.
Point of order, Your Worship.
Yep, go ahead, please.
So I think doing anything different from Councillor Fife Miller would be contrary, and I think we should just defeat this motion.
Do you know when you speak with wisdom and the clerk agrees with you, Councillor Cassidy, who am I to challenge either of you? So to defeat the motion allows us then to go forward. So any other comments or questions? Thank you, by the way. Then we'll call the question.
I vote to defeat it. It doesn't want to let me in. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Morgan? Motion is lost, 1-14.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe Councillor Fife Miller wants to put a new motion on the floor for the election of vice chair. So I'm happy to defer to him to do that now.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. I'd like to put on a motion that Councillor Hamou be named as vice chair for the Corporate Services Committee.
And do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Hillier, thank you. Comments, questions? And we never lead with what were you thinking. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor, please.
Yeah, obviously I voted the wrong way on the last one because my e-scribe is not working and I'm trying to catch up. So I just wanted to let colleagues know about that. I was happy. I would have liked to make it unanimous to vote against Councillor Fife Miller. That's rare, but I missed that. And I'm probably going to log out of e-scribe and log back in. I'll end up voting manually until I get back in just to try to correct this problem.
Thanks. And so you'll be voting yes on this just in case we miss otherwise. Any other comments or questions? Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Then we'll call the question.
Cole's had his hand up.
Thanks very much. Not used to all. I didn't see Councillor Van Holst show up, but go ahead, please. I didn't see his hand nor that, so go ahead, please, sir.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I was just hoping to hear confirmation from Councillor Hamou that she accepts the nomination. I'm happy to support it, but.
We're just about to be in the voting cycle. Councillor Hamou, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, it's on the screen for your vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll put item 4, that's 4.1 delegation request. And just to clarify with all colleagues, the delegation was received and the committee direction was to receive the delegation's presentation.
Thanks. Any comments or questions with respect to item 4.1? Councillor Fife Miller, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, based on the letter that we received in our package today, and I'm going to give my apologies because I wasn't around in March of 2021. One of the lines in the letter that we received is that, and I'll quote it, "We don't know why this council resolution was not fully implemented by staff." I'm wondering through you if I could just get staff to confirm 2 items. 1, that the motion is in place, and 2, that we are following the motion.
Mr. Kotzfis, do you want to respond to that?
It's Mr. Katolik here.
All right, thanks.
You can hear me fine?
Yep, go ahead, sir.
Yes, as previously mentioned at 3 previous committee meetings, any future municipally operated public parking lots will go through a site plan process involving a public participation meeting. And public participation meetings are advertised on the city web, in the Londoner, and circulated by mail. The direction of council in March 2021 was implemented by our city clerk's department in the public participation policy. Thank you.
Councillor Fife Miller, any comments or questions?
No, thank you. That was extremely helpful. I appreciate it.
Any other comments or questions to 4.1? Seeing none, then we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thanks very much. Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Your Worship. That's it for corporate services until we move into closed session.
Well, this is your first chairing of corporate services. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Colleagues, we now turn our attention to the first report of the Strategic Priorities and Policies Committee. As this is all financially focused, I'll turn this over to Councillor Pelosa, please, our budget chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. For colleagues, if you're having an issue with eScribe, I do suggest taking this moment to refresh or log out and log back in, as this will be a bit like Groundhog Day and get convoluted decently quickly, and it will be most helpful to see wording on the screen. So for colleagues this evening, as your budget chair, we will follow the same format that we did on the 9th of the budget meeting. Any votes that were not unanimous or had conflicts already declared will be pulled separately. So no worries there. So to start, the clerks and I had went through, we identified the votes that did not have conflicts and were unanimous. We're going to call those as a chunk if council allows. And then we will go item by item and separate them all out and pass it, recognizing it connects to bylaws and it keeps it a little bit simpler behind the scenes as things get more complicated. So for consent, what I'm going to be putting on the floor, there's 13 items we're going to start with, which will be items 1, 2, 4, 8, 9, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. So that's all the water. It was all unanimous. And the budget presentation, number 4 was the London Middlesex funding request. So that wording should be available in eScribe. And then we'll deal with the 6 items separate that we had conflicts on and split votes on. So the 13 items that will be before you to start were all unanimous with no conflicts in them.
Thanks. Any of those items that have been named, the colleagues wish to have separated? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Is number 7, the 4.5 reserves and reserve funds overview. I would like that one pulled.
Yes,
It
that,
is pulled.
it is pulled.
Okay, thank
Councillor.
you. I wasn't sure if my communicate went out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other items, colleagues? Then any other comments or questions with respect to those items that were dealt with unanimously as presented? Any comments or questions? I see none. We'll call the question.
Mr. Mayor, before I open the vote, I'd ask if we could have that motion reviewed. So what is on the floor is 1, 2, 4, 8, 9, and items 12 to 20.
That's close. It's actually 13 through 19, according to what I have, but Councillor Pelosi can confirm that.
I started at number 12.
All right, thank you. So 12, and did you finish at 20, Councillor Pelosi?
I'd finished at 19. I'd have to find what number 20 is, but.
Wastewater and treatment services, Councillor.
Okay, yeah, 20 is fine.
Any question, colleagues? If you refresh, you'll see the current item, which references 1, 2, 4, 8, 9, and 12 through 20. Any comments or questions about those? We're not trying to rush this. We just want to make sure that it's clear that what we're voting on right this very moment. Clerk, are we good?
This clerk is good. As long as the members have reviewed those clauses, I will open the vote.
Well, I think in preparation for this meeting, all of these items have been reviewed, but they're always open to question by colleagues to get answers that may not have yet been dealt with. So with that, we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Councillor Pelosi.
Are unanimous votes and ones that did not have conflicts. So thank you to committee for passing the bulk of that so efficiently. Next before us is item 3, being 4.1. This is the recommended property tax operating budget amendments. And within it is items P1 through P6. We had discussed just calling them separate, recognizing there was split votes throughout the way, and they do interconnect into other bylaws that's coming before us, and that would be the easiest way that we saw forward. So if I would just put 4.1 A being P1.
All right, we'll just make sure the clerks are ready, and we'll deal with these as 6 separate votes, and we will start with A and open it up for any comments or questions. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, and I don't intend on re-debating or revisiting all the components of the budget, but the 4.1 P1A is the component of the review where staff did a whole ton of work in all the different civic areas to find savings for us and really get our budget tax increase down. And I just didn't want to let this one go without, again, thanking them for the incredible amount of work they did to present this as an option for council. So thanks again, staff.
Thank you. Other comments? I see none. We will vote on 4.1A.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you. On B on the floor, and this was a split vote at council, has to do with the London Middlesex Health Unit inflationary pressures.
Comments or questions? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-1.
Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you. The RBC Place London funding support request, and it was a unanimous vote at council.
Comments or questions?
At committee.
At committee. Councillor Turner knows that because he's on that committee, actually. So that's, thank you. Other comments or questions? Let's call the question then, please.
No.
Sometimes we're on, not on mute when we should be, and sometimes it's the other way around.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Councillor Pelosi.
4.1D is case number 4, the private parking enforcement increased fines. This was unanimous vote at council.
Thanks very much. Comments or questions? We'll call the question now.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. 4.1E at committee was there's a conflict in there, and so we're going to have to call it separately as it's childcare in Ontario Works. And the clerk can advise best then, recognizing there is a pecuniary interest in this one.
I think Councillor Van Meerbergen, you acknowledged a conflict there. Thank you. Any comments or questions on this item? Then we'll call the question.
Sorry, the clerk's not quite ready with this one. Just a moment, please.
Thank you. Councillor Van Meerbergen, you had a comment or a question before the vote?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify. So the childcare portion will be separated out from Ontario Works?
We'll go to the clerk for that.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if you could just give me a moment. I'm not sure, my note has it separated out, and I just want to make sure about the other half of it. So if you just give me just a brief moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, clerk.
Thank you. So the first vote to be opened is case P5A. This is the childcare portion of subsection E.
Any comments or questions with respect to this component? Then we'll call the vote.
Councillor, thank you. Closing the vote, motion carries 12-2 with 1 recuse.
Yeah, and the next section regarding Ontario Works, the wording will now come up from the clerks.
And again, we'll invite you to, so it's very clear what it is. We refresh, go to current item, and you'll see what it is we'll be dealing with before we, and then but what I'll do before we call the vote is I'll look for entertaining any comments or questions. I see none, we'll call the vote.
Counselor Turner? Closing the vote, motion carries 14-1.
Councillor Pelosi.
4.1F was a split vote at council, and this is business case P6, being the infrastructure gap and community building projects reduction. I'll put that on the floor.
Comments or questions, colleagues? Councillor Turner? Councillor Turner, you have your hand up. Any other comments or questions, and colleagues? Last call for Councillor Turner. There you are. Did you have any questions on this item, Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Your Worship. If I might, just through to staff, the infrastructure gap, has it been accounted for with respect to environmental and climate change impacts? One of the things we've seen recently, especially in British Columbia and out east, with the significant adverse weather events, is almost catastrophic loss of municipal and provincial infrastructure, roads, bridges, things like that. Does our corporate infrastructure plan account for that, or is it just based on routine and regular amortization of assets?
Let's ask Ms. Barbone.
Thank you, through the chair. So no, this is at this point in time, it is solely related to the replacement value of a like-for-like asset. That is something that we are certainly looking at and in discussions with our capital asset management team about how we would go about doing that going forward. But it is something that is certainly going to take a little bit of time as those standards and as things start to evolve to look at how we would account for that. But it would certainly move to likely increase the cost of a replacement value if we're not doing like for like in the future.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Barbone. I appreciate that. So this kind of highlights a bit more of my concern. I had thought to raise the point when we were discussing that budget last time. I still have significant reservations about reductions in our contributions to infrastructure gap. This highlights a little bit further. It shows that our replacement costs will either be higher or our life cycles will actually have to be shorter as a result of climate impacts, or having the potential for catastrophic losses of pieces of infrastructure. As you may recall, not long ago, we had significant flooding at the forks of the Thames, which threatened to shut down even the Warncliffe Street Bridge. And we've had to bolster up supports around our sewage treatment plants and the like that. So I hope, I know where the vote had went at the last pass, but I hope maybe some of my colleagues will reconsider.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions, colleagues? I see none. We'll call the question.
Councillor Cassidy.
I guess everything that Councillor Turner just said.
I think we're looking for the vote here.
So I had to sign out of eScribe. I will vote no if we're on the infrastructure item still. That's what I would vote no on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Closing the vote. Motion carries 9-6.
Thank you. So that concluded that section. So that moves us on to item 5, being 4.3, review of consideration property tax operating budget amendments. This relates to budget cases P7 and P8. We had split votes on all items in the above section, or the forthcoming section that we are going to be discussing. So we had put business case 7 into 3 sections. So P7A has to do with the neighborhood decision-making programming operating expenditure. I will put that one on the floor.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Then we'll call the question.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, so P7A was not supported, so there's not something to vote on. The only portion that was approved at committee is the P7C for 200,000. So I will save this motion so that the members can review it, but the subsections 1 and 2 were not supported at committee, so they just go forward in that manner. So I'll present this for the members' review.
Perfect. Thank you. So that leaves us with business case P7 Part C being athletic travel grants, and this had passed at committee 13-2, and I'll put it on the floor.
Thanks very much, Chair. Comments or questions? Then we'll call that question.
Closing the vote. Motion carries 14-1.
Councillor Pelosi.
Apologies for that. Item business case P8. This is the Parks Planning, Design, Parks and Horticulture and Urban Forestry Naturalization and Reduction in Tree Trimming. I'll put this one on the floor, and it was also not a unanimous decision at committee.
Comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote. Motion carries 15-0.
Closer.
Thank you. That moves us along to item 4.4, being number 6, being the review of recommended property tax capital budget amendments. This is business cases P9 to P12. Sorry, just one moment. We went quickly. So it is a split vote where we come to B. So I will put A on the floor.
The invasive species management capital expenditure. Any comments or questions? Then let's vote.
Closing the vote. Motion carries 15-0.
Councillor.
Thank you. I'll now on the floor being P10, the transportation capital project adjustments and expenditure.
Comments or questions? I see none. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Councillor?
Thank you. At committee, we called C and D together. So if the clerks are fine with that, I will do that the same. And this is business case P11 and P12. So long-term disposal capacity and zero emission buses.
If colleagues wish those voted on separately, that can be done. Failing that, if there are any comments or questions. I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. This brings us to item 7, being 4.5, reserves and reserve fund overview. This was a unanimous decision at committee, but was requested by councillor to pull it, and she has circulated a motion beforehand to council, which I believe she will now speak to.
Go ahead, councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I would like to follow up on the public participation meeting that was held on the annual budget update for 2022. And we received a submission from Mr. S. Levin for additional monies that are needed for monitoring ESAs. And as we know, ESAs are environmentally sensitive areas, and they are being very well used during the pandemic. People use them not only for mental health, but for physical health as well. And the challenges of getting extra boots on the ground to monitor our ESAs has been a concern for the team. And so following up on Mr. Levin's submission, I would like to present a motion to council through the reserve fund portion where I have circulated the motion and I would like to read it for those who are listening in. And the motion reads that the civic administration be directed to consult with the Upper Thames Conservation Authority with respect to the potential need and ability to facilitate additional monitoring of ESAs and report back to the appropriate committee in the first quarter of 2022. I know I've got a seconder in Councillor Turner. I would like to put that on the floor. I think it's really important that we at least send this submission to staff to have a review and a report back to the appropriate committee before we go through. We have a 4-year budget. I'm very respectful of where additional money should go. And I do think that having this report back will be giving us further clarity on the boots that are needed on the ground. And with that, I'd like to present my motion.
And Councillor Turner, you're seconding? Thanks very much. Comments or questions? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you to our finance staff, or perhaps our budget chair wants to respond as well. But through you, when an annual budget update is coming together, if boards, agencies, and commissions of the city have additional needs that have arisen outside of their business cases that come through the multi-year budget request, the big process, are they not able to work with city staff to bring that forward as appropriate already?
Ms. Barbone.
Thank you through the chair. So our understanding is that this request was brought forward by Mr. Levin through the PPM. It is not a request from the UTRCA, and in conjunction with the discussions we had with Mr. Barrett earlier, our understanding is there was some discussion about some potential needs, but that nothing has been identified. So we would need to do some work to report back and identify if there even is a need at this time.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you. So I'm not going to be supportive of this motion. I respectfully, because obviously in the East End, we have the Meadow Lily Woods ESA, very, very important part of the community's natural environment resources. But to me, this is the Upper Thames responsibility to come to us with an annual budget update request if they've identified a need. When we start responding to PPM comments and then start looking to generate more business case potential costs, even through reserve funds, and frankly, I'm concerned about even identifying it as a potential use of reserve funds, because if it's an ongoing monitoring situation, to me that's an operating cost and belongs appropriately in an operating budget ask in the future. I'm really cautious of using one-time money for what could potentially be an ongoing ask. And I'm really cautious about asking civic administration to undertake an additional round of consultation specifically with Upper Thames on a need when every board, agency, and commission has already had this opportunity to do so. And they did not bring this forward through the budget process. I'm not willing to support something that's coming through from one letter received at a PPM. So I'm not supportive of this, despite the fact that I have zero doubt that the councillor is bringing it forward because of her passion for the environment and obviously the value that we all place on our ESAs, but I can't support this at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be supporting this one. I think there was a pretty good case made for it at the public participation meeting. And of course, I hope that we'll be responsive to PPMs. That's the purpose of holding it. So in this case, I think it's fine. We're looking a little further into an idea that was brought forward from a long-standing member of our environmental committee.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if there's anyone else that would like to speak to this. I would like to wrap up and respond to some of the comments that have already been made, but I can do that in my wrap up.
I have no one else on the speakers list here.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. No, I'm not ready for you yet, Councillor Hopkins. I now have Councillor Turner. Go ahead, please.
My apologies. My hand must have fallen down somehow. Must have gotten tired holding it up there. As for Your Worship, I appreciate the motion being brought forward by Councillor Hopkins. I agree with Councillor Van Holst's comments on this. The request here is just to go back and talk with staff. It was a point that was identified during a public participation meeting. It's not an earmarking of funds. It's not an allocation of money. It's a question that was legitimately raised through the public participation meeting. I'm disappointed by Councillor Lewis's comments. The entire point of a public participation meeting is to solicit comments from the public on how the budget is allocated through the upcoming year. And if we're not listening to comments from the public and acting on them where we have opportunities to do so, I'm not quite sure why we hold those meetings. So this is a really important point. I think if there is the opportunity and the need, both of those have to be true. The opportunity and the need have to exist in order for something to be brought back to council for us to consider. If there's no opportunity and no need, we don't have to worry. So this is quite reasonable. I don't think anybody should be scared by it or worried about it. Let this pass and let's see what comes back. It's a conversation, and it's quite the reasonable point in the discussion for us to have that.
Any other comments or questions with respect to this? Not ready for yet, quite, Councillor Hopkins. Well, I lied. I guess we are. Go ahead, please.
Your Worship, sorry, just on a point of order.
Go ahead, if it's a point of order.
preemptively. We are a council. I thought we established previously that the prior tradition of a wrap is actually not procedurally correct. And I'll defer to you and the clerk on that, but mindful of the fact that people are supposed to be speaking once and once only at council.
That would typically be the case, Councillor Lewis. I'm not accepting this actually as a wrap. I'm accepting this because frankly, as Councillor Hopkins was introducing her motion to this and providing a bit of background, I'm actually treating this as brand new, but otherwise your point's well taken. Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, for allowing me to do a wrap here on the motion that's being presented.
Not a wrap. You're starting fresh. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'll start fresh. And just to respond to some of the comments that I heard, I think it's really important that we as council understand where this request came from. It came from the public participation meeting. They are important. Thank you, Councillor Van Holst, for those comments and following up on Councillor Turner's comments. This is a public submission. It is something that is not coming from the Upper Thames Conservation Authority Board. I think it's very clear to understand that. We have an ESA team with the City of London, and it's operated with the Upper Thames. This is where this report will be coming from, to see if there is a need and an opportunity to deal with the monitoring. I think we really have to understand that, and the importance of public participation meetings are important when we listen to what the public has to say. So with that, I think it's really clear that we understand where this ask is coming from.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions? I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries.
Thank you. Councillor Plaza.
Thank you. I believe that I would have to ask the clerk if that takes care of item 7 being 4.5.
I'll just go to the clerk on that because it was entered as an amendment on the record, but clerk, can you just clarify so whether we have to vote on this as amended or treat the next item separately? Could you just comment, please?
Ms. Westlake Power.
My apologies. I do have a motion to approve the clause as amended. It requires a mover and a seconder.
I'll look for a mover. Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Hamou. Thank you. Comments or questions? This is the motion as amended. I see none. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote to approve as amended, carried 14-1.
Back to you, Councillor Pelosa. Thank you.
This on to item 10 being 4.8, the operating budget. At committee, section A had parts 1 to 4 broken out and parts B was broken out as well. We're going to follow the same format as this is where different pecuniary interests are all mingled in. So we'll follow the same format to keep things simple. So I will put A1 on the floor. This is the operating budget in regards to the London Public Library, and Councillor Turner had a conflict on this one.
Comments or questions? We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 13-1 with one recuse.
Thank you. AII is that the amended 2022 operating budget for children's services be approved, and a conflict was declared on this one by Councillor Van Merbergen.
Comments or questions? We'll call the vote.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0 with one recuse.
Councillor Plaza.
Thank you. AII that the amended 2022 operating budget for golf be approved. I'll put it on the floor, and Councillor Helmer had declared a conflict on this one.
Comments or questions? We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 13-1 with one recuse.
Councillor?
Thank you. AIV 2022 operating budget excluding the London Public Library, Children's Services, and golf be approved. There was no conflicts on this one, but it was a split vote at committee.
Thanks very much. Any comments or questions? Then we'll call the vote.
Councillors Hellman, you got it, and Councillor Lehman. Councillor Lehman.
Councillor Lehman votes yea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Closing the vote, motion carries 14-1.
Councillor Plaza.
Thank you. B1, the operating budget be readopted. And this one is regarding the London Public Library, and Councillor Turner had a conflict.
Thank you. Comments or questions? We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 13-1 with one recuse.
Councillor.
Thank you. Item BII, the amended 2023 operating budget for children's services be approved. Councillor Van Merbergen had a conflict on this one.
Thank you. Comments, questions? See none, we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0 with one recuse.
Councillor.
III, the amended 2023 operating budget for golf be approved. Councillor Helmer had a conflict on this one.
Comments or questions? Let's call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 13-1 with one recuse.
Thank you. I'll put item B1V on the floor, the amended 2023 operating budget excluding London Public Library, Children's Services, and golf to be approved.
Comments or questions? We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-1.
Thank you. That concludes item 10. Item 11 is 4.9, the capital budget. There's some golf mixed in throughout this one. So we had separated it out at committee when we do it, so I'll follow the same. Actually, is there golf in this one? I will follow the same voting as we did at committee. So I would put item A, B, and C on the floor. And it's respect to the capital budget, excluding library services and golf.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Then we'll call the question.
Councillor Turner? Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Councillor?
Put D on the floor in all parts, and that the following actions be taken with respect to the library services capital budget, and Councillor Turner has a conflict on this one.
Comments or questions? Then we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0 with 1 recused.
Thank you. I will put E, I, and I on the floor, that the following actions be taken with respect to the golf capital budget, and Councillor Helmer had a conflict on this one.
So just to be clear, there are a lot of ayes there. Are you putting
All of E.
All of E.
All of E.
Thanks very much. Comments or questions? I see none. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0 with 1 recused.
Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you. We have already dealt with items 12 through 20. So to the best of my knowledge, Mr. Mayor, that concludes the first report, the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee, and the 2022 budget.
Thank you. As a matter of record, I've been through a few of these now. You've been much more effective than the prior budget chair. I don't know what that's about, but very smooth and very organized. Thank you very much. And no disrespect to the deputy mayor ever intended. He's quite a nice person. Well done. Thank you very much. So colleagues, I'm going to turn your attention now to then item 10. There are no deferred matters, but on the inquiry list, we do have, pardon me, there are no deferred matters, but on inquiries, we have a couple, and the first I'm going to turn to is 11.1. Councillors Morgan and Hamou, you have an inquiry. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm just pulling this up here so I can see it. If colleagues will obviously recall that in response to the horrific terrorist attack that occurred in the northwest corner of the city in Hyde Park there, we took a number of actions, and as did the entire nation leading up to an entire national summit. Civic administration, we know, has been hard at work on a series of projects. However, based on a few media stories recently, as well as some questions from constituents, I don't think it's abundantly clear on what work is happening, what work is ongoing, what work is to come, and where the key decision points are coming up for council with respect to the work we're doing on fighting Islamophobia and dealing with some of the recommendations that came out of the National Summit from the NCCM. So we wanted to inquire today to respectfully ask the city manager if she could provide a verbal update on the progress to date and the general timing of the related topics and council decision points to come.
Ms. Livingston.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and through you, thank you for the question. Over the past several months, there have been many activities that have been underway in response to Council's motion. I'd like to first answer the question about the timing of recommendations coming forward to Council, and then I'll provide an overview of the work that has been underway since Council passed the motion. So Council can expect a report coming forward to the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee on February 8th. And pending the discussion on February 8th, moving forward to Council on February 15th. In response to Council's motion, members of the London Muslim community, along with many members of the community-based and public sector organizations, have come together over the past several months to focus on actions that will help to dismantle Islamophobia in our community. Under the leadership of Rumina Morris, who is our Director of Anti-Racism, Anti-Oppression Division here at the city, outreach began over the summer with meetings taking place throughout the fall, and in fact they continue and will continue into the new year. Approximately 80 members of the diverse Muslim community in London, including individuals from all local mosques, Islamic centers, various ethnic associations, community advocates, CDIS members, Hikmah, the Muslim Association of Canada, and the Muslim Resource Center for Social Support and Integration were all invited to participate in this working group. In addition to members of the Muslim communities, approximately 30 community-based and public sector organizations were also invited to be part of the working group. This included all of our school boards, our post-secondary institutions, our healthcare institutions, London Police, Child Welfare, the London Public Library, our neighborhood resource centers, the YMCA, the museum, and members of the Community Diversity and Inclusion Strategy. And finally, recognizing that the media play a very unique role in telling the stories that define our community, local media outlets were invited to participate in a facilitated discussion as part of this process. In total, there have been 5 working sessions with these groups, as well as many meetings with individual organizations who are part of these groups and individuals who are members of these groups. Now, all of that work is contributing to the development of the final set of recommendations. Those recommendations are being brought to a final working session of the working group in January, where representatives of the Muslim community will meet together with representatives from the community-based and public sector organizations to hear a summary of the feedback that's been gathered to date, along with confirming the recommendations that will be brought forward to Council. In addition to an action plan that will be locally focused, you can anticipate that there will be a recommendation in the report to you to endorse the policy recommendations from the National Council of Canadian Muslims, which were prepared in advance of the National Summit on Islamophobia that took place this past summer. As well, you can anticipate a recommendation to Council to support the Our London Family Act. Finally, the report to Council will also include a set of recommendations on actions to honor and remember the Afzaal family, as well as actions to honor and celebrate Muslim contributions to our community. Our commitment has been to facilitate the process to ensure that the recommendations to end Islamophobia are centered on the voices of many, recognizing that the Muslim community in London is diverse. So we have taken the time to engage deeply in many community conversations to identify impactful actions that will be critical to making a difference in London. And we look forward to continuing that work and bringing it forward to Council early in February.
Thank you very much. I understand we have a second inquiry. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. So my inquiry is about the news coverage that's taken place over the last few days concerning the employee vaccination policy that's here at the City of London. And I just want to be clear that it was news media that brought this to my attention, and I believe other members of council, and it wasn't something that that I was aware of. So the city manager will probably want to outline the changes that have just taken effect today in that policy, but I do have some additional questions. My main question is why the policy for employees of the City of London differs from similar organizations, especially London Police, who are also city employees, but have come back with their own policy, which seems to be much stricter than the City of London policy. And I'm wondering why we have not enacted a policy that's as strict as City of London and the Middlesex London EMS.
Ms. Livingston, do you want to start with that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the changes that have been implemented, and it isn't just changes to our mandatory proof of vaccination policy. We strengthened a number of things based on the review of our practices in response to the current situation of the pandemic and based on the advice of public health. So based on that, the changes that we have made to the proof of vaccination policy for employees is to require that for those who have submitted attestations, that we proceed with individual COVID plans that include either remote work or rapid antigen testing or leave of absence. Those are the main options. These are based on accommodations for those individuals based on their attestations. In addition to changes to our vaccination policy, we have also strengthened our screening efforts at all our facilities for employees and reinforced PPE requirements. With respect to the question about why is ours different from other organizations, our policy was developed based on the direction from public health to create a mandatory proof of vaccination policy. We did that based on our analysis of the employment law and Ontario human rights obligations in Ontario, and based on our review of that, we developed this policy and have implemented it going forward. I would also just like to add that the proof of I apologize for that. The proof of vaccination policy is one of the many tools we have and use in order to address COVID in our workplace. We begin first by trying to prevent the hazard in the workplace at the get-go, and that we do by reverting to wherever possible remote work, in-person screening, and now the rapid antigen testing. I'm sorry. We also, once you get into the workplace, have done many things to prevent the transmission. That is also the screening, the rapid testing, physical barriers like plexiglass, PPE that varies according to the role that an individual may play. So in the case of fire, that includes eye protection, N95 masks, nitrile gloves, disposable gowns, bunker wear for medical calls. Additionally, physical distancing, occupancy limits, we do robust contact tracing, and on top of that, our vaccine policy. And in order to prevent or reduce illness for those that may become COVID positive, we have all of those dimensions in addition to that, our vaccine policy. So it is a tool on top of the many, many other things we have in place to try and keep our employees safe. Thank you.
Thank you. I gather Councillor Cassidy might have another question.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. So I'm wondering if the city management has considered a special separate policy just for first responders, which would include London Fire Department. It's my understanding that some of these issues and concerns and worries and fears were brought to the media from members.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you there. This is about questions, not that additional background that goes with this. I apologize.
Okay. Sorry, Your Worship. Okay.
So you're welcome to ask the question.
My question is, given that firefighters are different workers from other city workers responding in people's homes, in emergency departments, in long-term care homes, going into ambulances, and knowing that we have a separate policy for Dearness and for London Police, has there been any consideration for a specific or separate policy similar to those other first responders for London firefighters?
Ms. Livingston.
Thank you. Through your worship, the direction for separate policies for some of the organizations you have mentioned have come provincially, and I am unaware that there's been a provincial direction for specifically for fire, nor have I seen that direction from public health. What we have tried to do is respond to all of the public health guidance that's been provided to us, both from a PPE perspective, from a modification to work perspective, and based on the vaccine. So we have modified the PPE requirements, and I should also say that the chief has put in place many other requirements that occur in the halls that are specific to what has to happen in the halls and on the trucks. So all of those have been done specific to the role that fire plays and the PPE requirements to assure that they are safe as well as the public when they respond to calls. However, we have not instituted a separate vaccination policy for fire.
Thanks very much. Councillor Cassidy.
My final question, in the policy, it talks about what we have been doing and talking about cohorting. I'm wondering if the cohorting includes, and this is my final question, Your Worship, if the cohorting includes people traveling in trucks together, a very small confined space, knowing they have PPE, but would you cohort vaccinated people with vaccinated people and unvaccinated people with unvaccinated people? Would your cohorting go to that extent?
Ms. Livingston.
Through the chair, the attestations for our individuals are private. There are only a very small number of individuals at the City of London who actually know that information. I, in fact, do not know individuals. And so in order to a cohort that way, we would be identifying people's private information. However, we have gone, and fire is an example where cohorts are used to try and limit the transmission in our organization. We use cohorts in other places, actually in a number of work sites across the organization to try and be able to maintain service should we have transmission in the workplace. And I'll just also add that to date, we have had very minimal workplace transmission in our organization. And I say that is a huge testament to our staff and the steps that they take every day to try and keep themselves and each other safe.
Thanks very much. Councillor Van Holst, this is not a debate. This is an inquiry set forward by Councillor Cassidy. So as far as participating in this, I will exclude that. I do permit inquiries if there are those that are specific. And again, in the spirit of the rules around inquiries that has been approved by council, there's no argument, opinion of facts, except as that which may be necessary to explain the inquiry, and that's on a very limited basis. And again, I'm going to make the point, we do not debate inquiries, just to be clear. Councillor Van Holst, did you have a separate inquiry of which I was not made aware?
No, Your Worship, I was going to ask a couple questions about this. However, I think Councillor Cassidy has asked many of the questions, and I'm pleased with the responses that Ms. Livingston has provided. I'm glad to see that our actions to date have been very effective. Of course, a new variant has come out that causes
I'm gonna stop you
concerns.
there, Counselor. You were doing really well for a moment there, but again, I'm very mindful and respectful of the rules. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Counselor Morgan, I'll recognize you.
Yes, and I know you're enforcing the rules, Chair. So I will say under our procedure bylaw, section 18.4 of the procedure bylaw allows for a member to ask for leave to introduce a substantive motion based on an inquiry. And it would be my intent at this time, based on the inquiry and the answers from Ms. Livingston, to bring forward, to ask for that leave and bring forward a motion, a substantive motion related to aligning our council vaccination policy with the administration one. So I would, at the appropriate time, ask for my colleagues to seek leave to introduce that motion.
Well, that's how we'll start. And by the way, I'll remind colleagues, for the benefit of those who are not aware, that it requires a 2/3 support of council members to support leave in accordance with 11.4 of this bylaw. So with that, we'll look for a seconder. Several. Councillor Lewis, thank you. So that's not debatable. This is again to seek leave. So with that, we will call the question.
Councillor Turner?
My vote does not come up, colleagues. I will vote yes.
Thank you. Closing the vote, motion carries 14-1.
Thank you. 2/3 majority. So with that, I'll turn that over to Councillor Deputy Mayor Morgan, please.
Thank you, colleagues, for leave. The motion I'd like to move is that Civic Administration be directed to bring forward an updated members of council proof of COVID-19 vaccination policy that incorporates any changes to bring the council policy in line with the updated mandatory proof of COVID-19 vaccination administrative policy, as verbally noted by the city manager, to the next Corporate Services Committee meeting.
Thank you. Excuse me a moment. Sorry. You have a seconder there. I see Councillor Lewis. Thank you. Comments, questions? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, if I could speak to this motion now. If colleagues recall, it was always our intent through our discussions to ensure that the health and safety policies that we put on our staff related to this issue are similar to the expectations that we put on ourselves. My only intent here is to ensure that Civic Administration has the opportunity and direction from council to bring forward changes that would align those two policies where appropriate, recognizing that there are obviously some differences of process related to the different acts that apply to council. So I don't know what that will look like, but if it comes forward to the next Corporate Services Committee meeting, we can all take a look at it. We can all debate it. and then we can decide whether or not those are appropriate changes that we'd like to support. The reason why I'm doing this at this time is when I look at the committee cycle moving forward, providing that recommendation and direction at corporate services to report back to the next corporate services and then approving it for council would put us out of alignment with the administrative policy by well over a month. And so my preference is to give us the opportunity to make this decision with a tighter time frame, which is why I raised this motion based off of the city manager's answers to the inquiry made by Councillor Cassidy.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yeah, I want to thank Deputy Mayor Morgan for bringing this forward. I'm not sure why we didn't do this right at the beginning. I know a number of municipalities have aligned their staff policies and council policies all in one. So I think it's about time that we did it. So thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm going to vote against this. I think it'd have been a good thing to come through the regular committee cycle, because then it allows for some debate. It allows for research. I understand how why it might be coming up. There's a new variant out there, and every time a new variant is announced, people become very concerned and then want to double down on actions that are being taken already, which have debatable effectiveness in some cases in terms of our results. However, I note that upon your request, city councilors were willing to simply Zoom in and participate from home. And so what I see are always two paths. We can simply ask people, and they're very willing to do and make accommodations on their own, or we can come up with rules to force people to do things. And I prefer that not be the way that we move forward, especially when we haven't really seen evidence that there is in fact an increased threat. Viruses typically mutate and become less virulent, and that seems to be the case with this one. So the concerns I see may be misplaced, and I say that not for necessarily our council, and I realize that the deputy mayor is just trying to keep those policies in line. However, I'm looking at the other issues and the broader issues that are going on with the society. I see just more lockdowns, more restrictions happening, and I think people should have an opportunity to object to those. I have a minute here to do so, so I'm going to do that. I wonder why people don't speak up more. I noticed that there's always a little more put on the unvaccinated than the others. Maybe that's why they're okay with them going forward. But I think we need, and when these policies come forward, I would like to see some evidence that the Omicron variant warrants the changes that we're making, despite the fact that the city that our staff is able to make up a policy at their discretion. I would like to see those things for city council be warranted, and know that scientifically that's the case, because I think it's easy for people to overreact, and I believe there's much of that happening. However, at that point, I think I've finished my my comments. I'll be voting against this one, and welcome the deputy mayor to bring a motion through to the regular committee cycle.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks to Councillor Morgan or Deputy Mayor Morgan for bringing this forward. I think it's appropriate that we move in quick step with the administrative policies. I think that's an important thing for us to do. To Councillor Van Holst's points, I can appreciate his concerns. He's raised them repeatedly. Whether Omicron or any of the other variants create differences in terms of threats, we're finding that out right now. However, we don't want to find that out later and not have reacted now, because by that point we'll be in a bit of trouble if it turns out as predictions are providing to us. That all said, the measures that are being proposed are appropriate in light of increasing case numbers in general. I think it behooves us to make sure that we're taking all necessary precautions. And I know, I mean, through you, Your Worship, to the community, this has been a tough ride. We felt like we were getting out of the woods, and then we found ourselves faced with even more threat. And people are tired. People are frustrated. They don't want to see more measures, more restrictions, more requirements of them. But they're ones that we have to take right now. So hopefully my audio hasn't disconnected. I've had an unstable Zoom all day. But I appreciate your leadership, Your Worship, on this throughout the pandemic. I appreciate the work of staff and the work of council in helping to communicate the message and the need to the community. And I think in making sure that our policies are harmonized, we continue to reiterate that importance, not only amongst ourselves, but to show that we follow what we think is important for the community as well. And so that's why I'll support the emergent motion that's been brought forward by the Deputy Mayor.
Thanks very much. I see no other speakers on our list. So with that, we will call the question.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-1.
Thanks very much, and thank you, Deputy Mayor and colleagues, for your discussion around that issue. We are now formally on item 12, emergent motions. I'd like to pass the chair to the Deputy Mayor, please.
Thank you. I have the chair, and I will go to the mayor first. It's great that everybody's on Zoom, so I can actually keep speakers lists. This is going to work out great.
It's a more interesting way to try to control the audio of the video, but it still doesn't work. Deputy Mayor, good luck to you. Colleagues, first, what I'm looking to do is ask for leave to deal with an emergent motion relating to Bill 21 communications that were sent in the last several days that are in your package. So with that, I would like to move a motion to request leave.
So the mayor is moving a motion for leave. I'll look for a seconder to support that leave. I see Councillor Pelosa. We will, I don't believe leave is debatable, and I believe it requires 2/3. The clerks can correct me if I'm wrong. So with that, leave is moved and seconded on the floor, and we can put that to a vote.
Councillor Humu. Councillor Humu, we're not seeing the vote. If you wanted to vote verbally, that's also an option. Can Councillor Humu, if you wanted to unmute yourself and vote verbally, that's an option.
Sure, then yes.
Thank you. Closing the vote. Motion carries 15-0.
To read the motion, and then I will look for a seconder, and if seconded, I will allow you to introduce your motion. So to the mayor.
Thanks very much, colleagues. Referencing in your package the letter of December 17th, I won't go into the body of it, but until we put the motion on the floor, then I'd like to speak to it. But if I can, colleagues, it relates to the province of Quebec's Bill 21. And there are three primary components to the motion, and in the detail is in front of you and will be on your screens. But basically, that the following actions be taken with respect to the province of Quebec's Bill 21. Opposition to the province of Quebec's Bill 21. And it goes further to that, that the city's commitment to upholding freedoms set out in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms be affirmed. Secondly, the current legal challenge against Bill 21 be supported by London's Municipal Council, and that civic administration be directed to provide a one-time grant of up to $100,000 to the joint legal challenges of Bill 21 by the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the World Sikh Organization, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, with the funding to be accommodated from the operating budget contingency. So that's the motion, Deputy Mayor, and I know that the letter in the package has been signed by Councillor Hamu and yourself, but I will now turn it back to you.
Councillor Hamu, were you looking to second that?
I was, thank you.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. So at this time, I can open speakers on this, and I know the mayor has his hand up to go first. I will start a speakers list if you can just flag for me. I see you, Councillor Hamu, and I'll start to make a list. So to the mayor.
Thank you very much, colleagues. 2021 has been the most challenging year in so many ways for this council. And certainly part of that was that horrific racist terror attack 6 months ago, killing 4 members of our London community, our Muslim community, just because of the clothes that they wore. I'm going to move it over to Bill 21, which prohibits the wearing of symbols of religion. That includes kippahs, hijabs, turbans, and crosses by government employees and teachers and others deemed to be in position of authority. There was a teacher in Quebec who lost her job because of a hijab. I mean, there's nothing more abhorrent than this. It is the antithesis of everything that we as a council represent. I can tell you in recent meetings with the Ontario Big City Mayors, they supported opposition to Bill 21, and we have many mayors from the Big City Mayors of Canada who oppose and are providing financial supports. At this point, I'm made aware that some 10 to 15 cities across the country are providing financial support as well as challenging Quebec's Bill 21. This is not our Canada. This is not about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that we have learned to grow up with. This is not the right thing to do. And if there's anything that has always struck me about this council, is that we do the right thing. And while it is not within the province of Ontario, I can tell you it impacts every city across this great country of ours. And if there is ever an opportunity to stand up, be counted, and matter, today is that time. So I'm looking to colleagues to help me in supporting this, and I'd like to also pay special thanks to Councillor Hamu, who worked with me on this letter, and Deputy Mayor Morgan, who worked with me on this letter, to try to get it as right as we could, as we support our Sikh community, our Muslim community, our Christian community, our Jewish community, all religious groups, for wearing a cross, wearing a hijab, somehow, some way. They're something other than first-class Canadians. That's not my kind of Canada. And that's why I'm asking for your support of the motion that's put forward today. And thank you, by the way, for entertaining this through the emergent motion. It was that critical and has recently come up because of the timing associated with the legal challenge of this situation. So thank you, Deputy Mayor, for the floor.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Hammoud.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay? Because I switched out my earplugs. Okay. So thank you. I wanted to speak to council about this issue today, as it hits me and my community the most, but it also hits many other communities. It hits the Sikh community, it hits the Jewish community, it hits the Catholic community. And where are we going to stop once it affects, you know, if Quebec says, well, Indigenous people can't wear their garb to their places of employment? Are we going to ignore it as well? I hope that we don't. And you know, the secular law, unfortunately, secularism in the past has been about creating more freedom. This secular law is about taking away freedoms. And anytime you take away freedoms, you erode democracy. And this is one reason we have to fight against this bill. It's also an issue of accessibility. Once you have a society where if you wear something or you are part of a community and you cannot be a teacher, you cannot be a lawyer, you cannot be a doctor, you can't be part of civil society, you can't be a politician. So I would not be able to do this in Quebec. And I just don't think that that sits right with me and with many other people. I know some people in London may be against this, but many people, not just in my own community, but all over London, feel very differently about this. And they are hit by this directly. And even in my own life, my husband is fully Francophone. He did his PhD in France. He's French. His background is French, and my children were at French first language schools. So if one of my daughters were to go to university in Quebec and wanted to wear hijab, this affects us directly. So members of London will be affected by this. So council, I'm really happy with the direction that the mayor and Councillor Morgan have taken with this, banding together with me to put this emergent motion down on the floor. Because our federal parties, unfortunately, haven't been taking the lead on this. And this is kind of a more of a grassroots action where our cities, our municipalities are taking the lead in saying to people, we're not going to stand here quietly while people's rights are being taken away. So the other thing I just wanted to bring attention to is that that I personally have been a big champion of human rights, not just in London, but all over the world. And I want to let people in London know that when ISIS was requesting for women and forcing women to wear the hijab and the niqab, I used my voice directly against that. And in fact, my office was bombed twice in Turkey by ISIS. So this is not just a fight for Muslims. This is a fight about human rights. It's about people being allowed to wear what they want, when they want, and shouldn't be banned from work, from a workplace or a job or anything like that, you know, to support their family. It just doesn't work. And again, anytime anybody wants to take away freedoms from people, I step forward and say no, like I will say no. So I hope that my esteemed colleagues on council today will support and vote for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to update colleagues on the speakers list, because it's hard to tell that I've kind of nodded towards you. I have Councillor Lewis, Councillor Hillier, and then Councillor Van Holst so far. So I'll go to Councillor Lewis next.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and through you to colleagues. I thought long and hard about how I wanted to articulate myself on this tonight. And I actually still haven't found the words for it that really clarify my position in a really nice, clear way. Because often I have been the voice who has said we don't get involved in other levels of government's jurisdiction. We don't backfill for the province. We don't tell them how to do their job, or the federal government. But this one, for me, is different. And I can't really articulate well how it is different, other than to say I can feel it. And I think we all have that internal voice in us that can say to us, even when we can't articulate it in a logical way, we can feel when something is just fundamentally wrong. And this is one of those situations where I'm listening to that voice. And I think about what Councillor Hamu was just saying. And I certainly wouldn't support a piece of Ontario legislation that said she could not join us in council chambers and still wear her hijab. I also wouldn't support Ontario legislation, and I think that all of you would join me in if the situation said that I couldn't wear a pride bracelet. And that's where it comes down. This is more than just about somebody's freedom of religion, because I believe very much in the separation of church and state and having a secular society. This comes down to personal ability to express oneself and their identity, and their religion can be part of that identity, just as other symbols can be other parts of our identity. And so for me, at a personal level, this just says we need to stand up on this one and say, no. This is one where, although it is not our jurisdiction, and although the provincial government of Quebec has no obligation to take into consideration what we're saying by supporting this motion, it's still the right thing to do, fundamentally at the end of the day. And I think we've heard from many, many, many Londoners over the last few days, both for and against, some of whom are feeling it personally, some of whom, and I say this respectfully, don't necessarily understand the full issue. They see the dollar figure attached and say we have lots of needs in London, and I understand why they say that. I've said it myself on other items that we want to spend on. We have needs right here at home just to focus on. But in this case, I think this is not only the right thing to do, it's the thing that a lot of Londoners are really calling on us to do today, and it is a leadership moment. So I'm going to be supporting this. I want to thank, I know that it was introduced by Mayor Holder, and I don't want to take that away from him because I appreciate his leadership on this, but I also want to acknowledge and thank Councillor Hamu for sharing her unique perspective on this tonight. And I've certainly heard from many members of the Muslim community in London, but from the broader London community too, who say support this, and I'm going to do that tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I have Councillor Hillier next.
Thank you very much. Yes, I also support this emergent motion. It is very important. I only have one question, and I think legal can answer it publicly. Are there any legal ramifications for us giving $100,000 in municipal funds for legal fees being used in Quebec?
Well, it's up to Mr. Card on whether or not he wants to answer that publicly or advise to do it in camera. So I'll go to Mr. Card.
Yeah.
Thank you. My advice would be that we discuss legal matters in camera.
So I'll go back to you, Councillor Hillier, on this. I know you asked a question, but I don't want to stop you from making comments.
Yeah, I just like you to answer that one question. I appreciate and I support the motion. I just want to make sure that we're crossing all our dotting our I's and crossing our T's.
Yes, the recourse to that would be you'd need to move a motion to go into camera to seek legal advice on the motion that's before us on the floor. And you need a seconder, and we could vote on doing that if that's the course you want to take.
I would like to take that if there's a seconder.
Seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. So we're now shifting gears a little bit here to move into camera to get legal advice from our solicitor on the motion that's before us. I'll just want to check with the clerks since I can't do the reading their eyes or their movements to make sure that I'm running this properly and that I've got all the appropriate pieces. I believe moving into camera, can't remember if it's debatable or not. I'm trying to pull up my bylaw, but just if I could just check with the clerk to make sure that this is the appropriate time to move into camera and I've got the mover and a seconder and I can open the vote.
Through your worship, yes, that is the appropriate procedure. It has a mover and a seconder, and we would just need a moment just to get that wording up in eScribe.
And can you remind me if that's debatable? I can't pull up my procedure bylaw fast enough.
Yes, that would be debatable. It's a regular motion.
Okay. Well, the motion to move into camera is being pulled up. I'm going to look to see if there's any debate on moving into camera for this. Okay, I don't see anyone, so I will wait until the clerks give me the signal that they've got that wording up, and then I can open the vote. And we're just going to pause things until that time.
Mr. Chair, that motion is available for voting.
Thank you. So the motion is up that council convene advice subject to solicitor-client privilege with funds related to the legal challenge of Quebec's Bill 21. So that is what you're voting on. So it's open.
I've already voted.
I'll vote yes. Mine's not working.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-1.
Okay, we're going to need a minute to camera mode here. I'm going to wait for the signal from the clerk that we are good to go.
Mr. Chair, I'd also like to vote to note that we will stop the stream in YouTube and it will not be restarted, but the stream in eScribe will be available to be restarted for anybody joining us from the streaming.
Okay, thanks for noting that.